thank you for joining us for this event. It's called Do Politicians Hate the Great British Pub? And it's all sort of stemmed out of our campaign at Taxpayers Alliance to extend the VAT cut for hospitality, which was introduced by the Chancellor, I think it was last summer now, to help out hospitality as we come out of the COVID pandemic. Now, it's been about 2.5 months since the Freedom Day, the famous Freedom Day. But have things really gotten back to normal? Are we still, seeing reduced numbers in our pubs, bars, restaurants, cafes? And what can we do about that to help out our hospitality sector? So I've got a fantastic panel with me today to discuss those issues. Joining me are Charlie Gilks, the co-founder of the Inception Group, which is a chain of bars and restaurants and clubs in London. I'm joined by Emma McClarkin, who is the Chief Executive of the British Beer and Pub Association. On my left, I have Kate Nichols, who is the Chief Executive of UK Hospitality. And on my left, I have Jonathan Gullis, who's the MP for Stoke-on-Trent. So to kick off, I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on the last year and a half and where we are now and where we're going in the future. So Kate, would you mind kicking us off on that?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. So I'm Kate Nichols. I'm Chief Executive at UK Hospitality. So we represent the breadth of hospitality businesses from single-site independent pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, right the way through to the national chains. And it has been a very torrid time for the industry. If we go back to 2 years ago, the last time I was at conference, I was talking confidently about the fact that we were going to grow 5% year on year in 2020. We were going to add to the revenue, £130 billion of revenue that we generate in the hospitality sector, or did generate in the hospitality sector, meaning that we're larger than aerospace, automotive and pharmaceuticals put together, and 3.2 million people who worked in the sector at that point in time, another 1.5 in our supply chain. And crucially, £40 billion of tax take to the Exchequer, which was the equivalent of the social care budget, the Brexit divorce bill, if you want to put it in that context. But that £1 in every 3 of our revenue was going straight back to fund vital public services. Over the last 18 months of the pandemic, we have seen revenues wiped out by 100 billion, and our international tourism spend, which is our third largest export earner in the UK, foreign visitors spend more eating and drinking out in our pubs, bars and restaurants than all of our food and drink exports put together. That has been entirely eliminated in 18 months. And just to put that in context, 18 months worth of losses of that scale, and we were losing money even when we were open. It wasn't just the periods of closure, but 18 months of losses is the equivalent of the 5 years' previous profits. So that gives you an overview of the scale of the challenge we have for coming back from that depth of loss. Crucially, we've been able to save a large number of businesses and jobs that we would not have been able to do without the help of the government. The schemes that we've had from the government have been invaluable. They have undoubtedly saved jobs and livelihoods, particularly the VAT cut, but you only benefit from VAT when you are open and trading. And for 6 months that the VAT has been in place, we haven't been open. For further 4 months, we're severely restricted. So that will be the single biggest thing that we can do to make sure that the industry recovers. And the topic is, does the government hate the Great British Pub? No, clearly it doesn't. It has invested over £35 billion in making sure that the hospitality sector has got through the crisis. But we need that support to continue, because it has taken the Great British Pub for granted over the course of many years, unless we have that continued support going through the recovery period, which, as I say, will be 2 to 3 years, then we will see many of those community outlets, the pubs and bars that are the lifeblood of our high streets and town centres, will struggle to survive. So we need to make sure that they don't take the Great British Pub for granted going forward, that we continue to have that lower rate of VAT locked in at 12.5% to allow the industry to start to recover. And then if we get that support, the industry can go back to doing what it does best and what it did in each and every year of the decade following the financial crash. £10 billion worth of investment in our high streets, 1 in 6 of net new jobs, and we can participate and deliver the government's levelling up agenda in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Charlie, do you mind kicking us off with your thoughts?
So I'm I think the only operator on the panel, and Kate has done as has Emma, a wonderful job at representing us. But it's been a very, very tough 18 months. We had a slight canary in the coal mine back in February 2020 when we started seeing some of our corporate international clients who people travelled over for conferences. They started to cancel as the pandemic grew. And then obviously Boris stood up on that Monday, that fateful Monday, and said, do not, socialise in bars, restaurants and clubs. And we felt at that point, we had to shut our business in its entirety. And then I think, my first model to the bank said that we'd be shut for 8 weeks. And they said, well, you've been the most bearish out of all the forecasts. You sure you'll be shut for 8 weeks? And God, if only we had been shut for 8 weeks. But, the furlough scheme did come in and it saved many, many of our jobs. But we had to make lots of hard decisions. And then there was the great reopening on Super Saturday on the 4th of July that was fated in the press. But the reality of Super Saturday was, there were no tourists, there were no people in their offices, and there were no theatres open. So it was very, very difficult to trade. And we slowly reopened. But I used to look every night on Twitter. There's a hashtag called Tomorrow's Papers Today, where you can read what the headlines are going to be the next day. And, I would say it's a very, very leaky government. And things were being leaked to the press the night before. And I would find out the next restriction that Matt Hancock had conjured up. Whether it was the rule of 6 or no households can mix. That's pretty difficult when you've got a pub in the city where no one goes out with their wife and kids. To the 10 p.m. curfew, that killed half my trade. And actually, I felt like a bull in the bull ring, and every restriction was like a spike in your back. And actually, there was some solace in being put down by Matador Johnson and being locked down in entirety when it came to November. But yeah, it's been incredibly difficult. But, there have been lots of great, there has been good support. Lots of our landlords were incredibly supportive. And, they are portrayed as the villains, but they've got a business to run too. Some support, has been fantastic. For us, we're a wet-led business. And actually a VAT cut on food doesn't really help. And you look at businesses like McDonald's, who've done brilliantly through their delivery and takeaway throughout the pandemic. They're actually up on revenue, and they've benefited from a 15% VAT cut. Whereas actually the bars and pubs, which have probably suffered the most because we've, restricted to table service. Actually, most restaurants, only do table service. And I've got a nightclub called Maggie's, which named after the late great Margaret Thatcher. It'd be popular with some of the people here. That didn't open at all until the 19th of July. So I think we have been hit some of the hardest as sort of bar operators haven't had anything like the support that food operators have had. But I think I feel very positive and optimistic about the future of the sector. I think we evolved brilliantly, and there have been some wonderful stories of great entrepreneurialism. People, pivoting their businesses, lots of takeaway ideas, cocktails by post, and it's a sector really worth saving. And we face lots of different challenges right now. Recruitment's a complete nightmare. The supply chain's a complete nightmare, and we want to invest in the UK public. We really want to see a UK workforce. They're not applying at the moment, and we need to get them to apply. We need to change a mindset amongst the people about how they can feel hospitality as a career, worth going for. Is actually can be a career, not just a job in between studies. And that's really our biggest challenge right now. But I think there are bright days ahead. But it's been really, really tough to even stay in the game.
Thank you. Emma, just building on some of the stuff that Charlie said there, you've been really focusing on the sort of wet-led side of things in the pandemic and how they've been affected. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, how they've sort of been impacted by the pandemic.
Well, I'm representing the British Beer and Pub Association. So we're 90% of all the brewing in the UK and about half of the pubs. But really, we've been on a hell of a roller coaster, as Charlie's just described, and it has truly been hellish. And if you look at the title of today's session, which is quite controversial, isn't it? Do politicians hate the pub? I hope not. Probably buying a round, yes, in the pub. But the reality is, if you open the newspapers, you looked at the restrictions, they were disproportionately impacting our Great British pub. If we think about the Scotch egg substantial meal, curtailments of this. In Scotland, I have to say, the banning of music in pubs, I mean, it went to the nth degree. And I think that actually the devolved administrations, the way that that's played out, particularly in Scotland, you can absolutely say that Nicola Sturgeon doesn't like the pub. And that's for sure. We have to be very, very, very clear about what we're fighting for in the United Kingdom. But anyway, I am digressing. It has been hellish for us. It has been very tumultuous. But the counter to the restrictions that we saw and the newspapers that was put out there, which deeply impacted confidence, which is the thing that is so sensitive to our recovery, is building up that confidence, not only for people to come and work in the sector, but also for you guys to feel confident to come out. And we're still persuading parts of our customer base to come back to the Great British Pub. But we do have the support from the government that has seen us through. That totals some 9 billion for the pub sector alone. But I have to make this point, which is actually where we saw the bricks and mortar and the doors of the pubs closed. Many people didn't see the taps turn off for our brewers, who lost 7 billion in revenue and over 50%. So they desperately need support, and we would be calling now for a beer duty cut to support our Great British brewers that didn't receive the same level of support. But that support was there. The government had made an investment. They chose us in hospitality and in the Great British Pub to invest in. And why did they do that? Because we are at the heart of our communities. We are on every high street. We're in every village, and we should be if we can stay that way. And this is what we can do. We can create jobs. We can boom the local economy in all parts of the United Kingdom. We really are the great leveller. When you walk into that pub, everybody should be able to come in, feel comfortable in a pub, afford a pint, but also, have that opportunity to even run their own pub as well. So that is what we're protecting. That is what the government needs to be investing in now. A lot of businesses' survival depended upon the fact of the state that they were in when they went into this pandemic. The government supported many businesses through that. Some sadly didn't make it. We know that we've lost 5% of our pubs already, and we are sadly on course to lose a similar number this year. That will be some 5,000 pubs that have closed. And when pubs close, they close for good. You'll all know a pub that is now a house or turned into something else, and that community asset is lost forever. So we have an awful lot that we need to protect in terms of that investment that they put in, and we'd be asking for them to help support businesses with business rates, reform, fundamentally, the continuation of that VAT discount so that we can compete with our supermarkets on that counterpoint, and of course support our Great British brewers that keep us all happy through good times and bad with that duty cut.
Thank you, Emma. Now, Jonathan, you're a politician. Do you hate the British pub?
I want to make it very clear that I certainly absolutely love the Great British Pub, and I can't think of anything better than going out in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk and having a pint at the end of a Friday. Because I tell you what, politicians spend way too much of their time in that Westminster bubble or on Twitter, whatever it is that exists out there. And actually what they don't do is spend enough time having common sense chat with common sense people in a common sense pub, which serves great British ale. And of course, I'm going to plug Titanic Brewery shamelessly, which is based in my constituency, as being the best British brewer in the nation. And if you haven't had a pint of plum porter, you haven't had a proper drink to this date. And if you have a look at the politicians that we have, I find the idea of us hating the pub is bizarre. The red line outside bloody Parliament's always heaving. It's always bloody staffers there, though. The politicians are normally hanging out on the terrace bar after hours. I'm always seeing stories about politicians getting up to no good on that terrace. But let's be quite frank. At the end of the day, the Great British Pub is an important institution. How do I know that? Well, I saw it for my own self in Stoke-on-Trent North. I put my victory down to the fact that at the Foaming Court in Norton Green, you can go into one half of the pub and get a pint, and you can go into the second half of the pub on bowling day and cast your vote. So I hope that everyone who was pissed up and voted for me repeats that same trick over again. And that just shows you that not only is the pub essential for the community, it's essential for our democracy if we're getting people elected in the second part. And I would make the point that Emma said Mrs. Sturgeon, the separatist, the nationalist who'd want to break up our United Kingdom, who despises the Great British Pub, is not just her. Mark Drakeford, as Kate whispered in my ear, so sorry, Kate, I'm nicking for your line. Mark Drakeford also showed utter disdain as well in the way that he treated the pub industry. But look, let's be quite frank, and obviously I'll be serious because I've got two parliamentary colleagues I see in the audience, so the whips are probably getting texts right now about my behaviour. I can say, though, very clearly that the pub is absolutely essential to our local communities. In the place I represent, they used to be heaving. Miners and pot bank workers would go and enjoy and milling around with one another, where many of the families are together, probably met in these pubs at social events. They bring people together. And what I always get sick and tired of when it comes to the government spending of any government is we always get obsessed with building the nice, shiny new building. Something flashy, something nice, something to point at and get a photo at when you cut the ribbon. But guess what happens? That shiny building probably lasts 3 or 4 years. The well-meaning community group running it end up not being able to cover the business rates or the electricity or the gas costs that come with it. So rather than investing in shiny buildings, why don't we invest money in schools, if you want to do youth events, or the Great British Pub to actually become a more of a beacon, a community hub? Because by doing that, it means that those institutions have much more chance to survive. It increases the footfall into the pub and ultimately means they have a much better chance to survive. And Emma was bang on, by the way, and I want to make sure I'm very clear. Titanic Brewery, one of the key people in putting together the plan of cutting beer duty when it comes to, and they try to find a way for the Treasury to be net neutral, but cutting the duty on when you buy a keg of beer, that would come down considerably, even by half. You would put it up by maybe 1 or 2p on the beer duty of a bottle in a supermarket. And ultimately, that then comes cost neutral to the Treasury, whilst at the same time, meaning that the pub can sell beer at a lower rate. And by the way, that's a Brexit bonus. And if we don't make the most of that Brexit bonus, then we might as well have ended up listening to Michel Barnier, who, by the way, now seems to be a Brexit convert. But you might as well have understood the idea that we should have stayed in the European Union. If we can't do the simple thing of cutting beer duty, then what is the point of leaving the European Union? When Germany has a sensible rate massively reduced, and I see ours at the ridiculous rate it currently is, it's unfair on the pub, it's unfair on the brewer, it's unfair on the taxpayer, and it's also harming the industry itself. And the business rates reform is absolutely essential. It is madness that a pub could be paying the same amount of business rates as an Amazon warehouse, for example, or a Sainsbury's or a Tesco. That isn't right. That isn't fair. I personally am a massive supporter of over time, and I see the Labour Party have adopted this policy, which is telling us something. But the idea of actually getting rid of business rates on the high street, on pubs altogether over time. But I appreciate that as a long-term ambition because, let's be frank, ladies and gents, £400 billion has been spent in this crisis. We do have to make sure that public finances are sound. The Conservative Party only win elections when the public know that we are capable of running their public finances. The reason they're terrified of a Labour Party that made about £200 billion worth of spending commitments with not a single idea of how they're going to get that money means that they are terrified because working class people count their pennies. They work hard, they cover their bills, they're proud to earn their money and they enjoy having a pint. The last thing they want to see us do in this country is be frivolous with their money because it's not theirs, it's their children's, it's their grandchildren's, their great-grandchildren who pick up the tab and suffer longer term. So I think that the Great British Pub is absolutely fantastic. I think the government, and I'm really pleased to hear the panel have said the VAT cut obviously will benefit those that are selling food, has been fantastic. I think that VAT cut should be a permanent fixture, and I hope that perhaps we might hear that going further forward. And that was something Anthony Mangle, bless him, who I know led the way on, but didn't really get the credit he deserved because obviously it was we weren't necessarily in the chamber, and that was fantastic. I think the beer duty, as I said, is so important. The business rates reform is so important as well. But as I say, the community. There's also the community ownership fund, the Levelling Up Fund, the Town Deal Funds. These are all pots of money that lots of communities, like I was lucky to receive in Kidsgrove, have been able. Now, luckily in Kidsgrove, we've got plenty of pubs and they're going very well, which I'm glad to see. But there's lots of opportunities for these type of organisations or politicians to invest in the pub, make sure that it becomes a community asset, find a respectable landlord who's going to make a success of it. Because I will tell you one thing. I know a dear friend of mine whose mother is an alcoholic. And with the pubs closing, she goes to find the nearby convenience store or the nearby corner shop. And despite the numerous attempts of my friend of sharing her picture, saying do not serve her, telling the shop that she will, of course, become abusive. She has mental health. It's related to that. And ultimately that you just need to stand firm. And worst case scenario, call the police to obviously remove her. But what happens every single time she goes, they take the money out of her hand. There's not a single pub in this country that would do that because they are respectable, decent owners of their bars. They understand that when people are suffering, that they need supported. And if we had more pubs and less convenience stores selling cheap rubbish off their shelves for a high margin of profit to people who are frankly vulnerable, then we would have a much better society. We see the antisocial behaviour massively drop in places like Bursham and Tunstall I represent, where I'm sick and tired of people sitting on the benches of my high street, getting drunk in the middle of the day, which is ruining the reputation of the town, it's ruining the trade for my local area. And ultimately, those people need support, and it's the corner shops that are doing it, it's not the pub. And so if we support the pub, we can make sure we can help the most vulnerable and those in need in our society. Thank you, Daniel.
Well, thank you for that, Jonathan. I'd like to come to a few questions in a moment, but I'm going to abuse my position as chair just to ask a few questions myself first. So Kate, we had a very strong defence of pubs from Jonathan there, but it seems like the government has sort of set the system against the hospitality industry more generally. I mean, they're thinking about introducing calorie counts on menus. There's a massive health drive, trying to get people's to lose weight. The tax system is massively set against the hospitality industry in favour of supermarkets, for example. Do you not feel like this is a massive issue to overcome? This is a big hurdle?
It is a huge challenge. I mean, we have big challenges that we need to look at and address as a society, and pubs and hospitality venues can play their part in that, and we do want to play our part in that. It's all about having the headroom and the ability to be able to look beyond survival. For many of our businesses at the moment, for the next 6 to 12 months, surviving will be all that they can do. And we need to make sure that we're not adding to the pressures that they're already facing. Significant cost pressures coming from wage rate growth, which is positive. But there are also cost pressures coming through the supply chain. Commodities are increasing, gas price increases that are going through, wholesale utility bill increases, insurance. All of these challenges that they are facing is squeezing the margin and making more of these businesses less and less viable. So what we want to do is to make sure that we're not imposing regulations on these businesses, but working with the government to try and look at how we can help deliver the government's objectives in a way that allows the businesses to survive and thrive.
Okay, and Charlie, I know something you're quite passionate about is business rates and the impact that has on particularly your business in London, as it's a very expensive area. So perhaps you tell us a bit about that.
The business rates are very outdated. I have one site in the city that pays nearly £200,000 of business rates a year. I mean, and that's a 350 capacity venue. So, they need updating, and especially now with people not working in the office 5 days a week in the inner city, the new norm is 2 or 3. Thankfully, for our business, we're lucky in the fact they're more destination, and that doesn't equal half the revenue. But for many businesses, that does. We're at such an unfair disadvantage to online retailers, and something needs to be done urgently, because the high street is going to be decimated. And as we said, you don't want to be walking past your local pub that is now luxury apartments, and that's going to become the norm. I mean, the high street will evolve, and I think, so many people reverted to online, I think, during the pandemic, but nothing can replicate being with people. Something we say in our business a lot of the time is that there's a big difference between service and hospitality. Service is a transaction. Service is how you can get service out of a vending machine. Service is how you get A to B. Hospitality is a way you make people feel. And we crave that social interaction. And I think during the pandemic, during lockdown, we missed that. And the pub is much more than a business. It's a community hub. It's where you share problems, you share issues. Quite often the good landlords can kind of see a problem before it happens. But unless these rates are changed, we're going to be putting our great pubs out of business.
And Emma, I wanted to come to something that I think Charlie mentioned earlier, was that hospitality businesses do want to train up British people. They do want to encourage young people to go into hospitality as a career, not just a job. How do we do that?
Well, we have to have the confidence that we're going to continue trading, particularly through this autumn and winter. So there is still a question mark about what's going to happen. We've been told that we won't have COVID passports for the time being, but there may be a plan B, and that's still hanging over us. So all those question marks put that, cast a shadow of doubt about us staying open and that we're going to be there for the long term. People want stability and security, I recognise that. But we do have a long-term confidence in our sector, but we need to find a way to convey that, and the government can help with the messaging that there's a confidence there for the sector moving forwards. But absolutely, we have a labour shortage, and it's not only felt by our sector, but many others. People have used this period of time in the pandemic to make different life choices, perhaps assess that. But certainly that instability in hospitality that has been created by everything that's happened to us and all the restrictions upon us has deeply impacted us, and we're going to have to repair that, but also look at other ways that we can bring people in. Hospitality is a fantastic sector to work in. I've met so many people since I've been in hospitality. They've been in there for years, decades and decades of service, because they love it so much. It gives so much back and gives so much reward. But our young people today, they just see it as a summer job. A temp job is not maybe revered in the same way, and we need to find a way that we can present it as a long-term career path for people, for our young people, or anybody, frankly. If you want to retrain, why don't you retrain? come and help us in hospitality. We desperately need your help. But that it is something that is a real-time option. You could be an entrepreneur like this man over here.
And you can progress. You can progress really,
Yeah.
quickly. That's the amazing thing. I've got some general managers who had never worked in hospitality, who, they're early 20s. They joined us 3 years ago. They showed promise. They went on a development program, and they're general managers on 60, 70 grand now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that can happen. There's no.
I might switch.
Exactly.
But it is the ultimate meritocracy. We can take anybody at any skill level and train them up so that they can have a valued career in hospitality. And as Charlie says, there is no other industry that will give you that level of responsibility at such a young age and at such a low level within the organisation where you are running your own venue. And the rewards are there for a lot of people, and then the sky's your oyster. But also, for those people who don't decide to make a career in it, for a lot of our young people who are coming out of 2 years where they've had no social interaction, they've had no school, it gives them the skills, leadership skills, soft skills, people skills, management, it's those soft skills that you can't teach, and it's those socialisation skills that our young people need. So not only can we be a long-term rewarding career, and we can provide it for anybody and locally, because the hospitality venues are where you live, but we can also make sure that we are the nation's best favourite first job to give those young people that start in life, that they are transferable skills that will take them from anywhere. And lots of people just see our industry as being front of house, bar staff, waiting staff, but those jobs are great for social mobility. But I was talking to one of our big pub operators. They've got 40 jobs in IT and cloud computing that they can't fill at the moment.
Yeah.
So if you want the IT jobs of the future, if you want the unicorns of the future, we will nurture them in hospitality in all parts of the country.
Well,
if we've got the breathing space from government to do that.
I feel God, I'm under pressure here on this panel. I am not making increments, and look, I think that first of all, Charlie obviously said I might come be a general manager. I on Freedom Day on the 4th of July last year, I pulled a pint and shamelessly looked like a Mr. Whippy by the time I'd finished. So I got heckles of where's the flake when I finished. So I can't certainly have the pulling powers of the Prime Minister on that one. But what I can say is that when it comes to the jobs angle, absolutely. Hospitality in general, if I look at, for example, ceramic manufacturers, and I'm sorry to be one of those MPs who always bangs on about their own area, but like Stoke-on-Trent obviously sells tableware. We're famous for it around the world. It's amazing that I spoke to Churchill China, a major manufacturer, and asked them what they found the situation. What's the biggest mistake they made in the pandemic? And they said the biggest mistake they made was letting go of 150 people when they thought that the industry was dying off, the hospitality was going, and ultimately, therefore, their customer base would disappear. They don't sell to you in the supermarket. They sell to restaurants and pubs at the chain end. And they found that since we've come out of the lockdown in March earlier this year, orders are well above 2019 record year. They offered all 150 people that they let go their job back on better terms and better pay, and only 10% still accepted. Steel Light have had a jobs fair for 100 people plus, a £500 bonus simply for working for them for 6 months. Only filled 50 out of the 100 plus roles available. So there is a massive jobs. And the problem is, and I found this when I spoke once at a restaurant to someone in London when I was with my mum, when I was a young lad. And I asked them, the French, I always said, I've sort of made a stereotype, and this will probably get me in trouble, but it's a dig at the French, so you're allowed to do it. I said that, why is it that, there we go. I said, why is it that the head waiters of top restaurants always appear to be French? What is it about it? And they said, well, it's because unlike you British who sort of sneer at that profession, we see it as a vocation. We see it as something going. He goes, you forget that I'm a head waiter. This guy was saying I'm a head waiter with a Michelin-star restaurant. Not only am I on a salary, I get a percentage of the profits. He's making more than the Prime Minister of this country, and he's a head waiter on his CV, and people would sneer at that in this country, I think, to a certain extent. Yet he's got a fantastic career where he goes around the world working with staff from all over the place and is seeing amazing things, and being an entrepreneur and a business person, absolutely, this should be a career that we celebrate. And I'll do my part in absolutely saying that, this is a profession that people should look for in long term. I remember when I was teaching in schools and you talk about McDonald's, and kids would laugh at me when I said you could have a job in McDonald's, and they went, why would I want that? I said, well, it's 40,000 a year, company car, private healthcare for you and your family, 32 days holiday a year on top of that. And then when an Aldi manager, £40,000 a year, when people heard that and actually understood the fantastic pay, they were wondering why I was keeping them at school and they couldn't run off already. And we've had a problem in this country for far too long on the jobs front, where Tony Blair was wrong on many things, but he was right about the importance of education. The problem he misstated was that education meant I have to go to university, I have to get a degree, and if I don't, therefore I can't succeed in life. And what we have done... And what we have done is talked down the vocational profession, or the hospitality sector for far too long. And I hope, and I think you've seen the tone, I personally believe the tone of this government is very much changing towards actually that you do not need a degree to succeed. I certainly know that looking back now, I wouldn't have gone to university if I understood what an apprenticeship even was back in my day. Of the fact that the plan for jobs is continuing to kickstart, the apprenticeships of £3,000 to employers, I think is an incentivisation there. But in terms of the specific part about calories on menus, look, I'm not someone who feels comfortable with shoving calories all over everything, only because I want to pretend, to be honest with you, that I'm not eating badly. But at the same time, I must confess, I don't see it being the be-all and end-all at the end of the day. I do think that at the end of the day, consumers should be entitled to know the product that they're buying off the shelf, or the food that they're ordering off the menu, and seeing the reality of it. I don't necessarily think it will change drastically behaviours or patterns, but I do think that that should be entitled. But at the same time, what I can say is that being healthy is not a bad thing to push for the government. We are a fat nation. That's something we have to be realistic about and understand about. And in Stoke-on-Trent, we are the worst in the West Midlands when it comes to obesity, which is one of the many reasons why people die well below the national average when it comes to end of life. And I'm saying that, by the way, as someone who is way too big around the waistline, 40-inch waist, 16.5 stone, 5'11". If you do the BMI, you'll suddenly figure out I'm very, very fat. So I need to work on myself. So ultimately, it's very important that we take this very seriously, and the government is right to push the importance of being healthy. I personally believe the way you push on being healthy is through better education, not just of kids in schools, but of families using the school as a hub in the community, teaching about cooking from scratch. There was a fantastic scheme done in the pandemic where the Hub Foundation in Stoke-on-Trent, they invested £150 per household for disadvantaged families into a slow cooker. For 12 weeks, you got recipes every day coming in. They were done with the family. They would use the slow cooker. They took photos. They sent it in to the Hub Foundation. Now those families have kept the slow cookers for life and hopefully got new patterns of behaviour. So that's a positive thing. But ultimately, we do have to make sure that, and we do have to think very carefully. The hospitality sector is something that's great in Britain. I'm from Stratford-on-Avon originally, where I've grown up. The restaurants, the pubs survive off the fact that 6 million people a year from America, Japan and China mostly go and visit that town. Yeah. They go to the restaurant in the evening to have the pre-theatre menu. Then they go to the theatre. Then they go to the theatre bar to have a few drinks. And then they go into the pubs afterwards. And then they stay in a hotel for the night because cleverly they managed to convince Chiltern Railways to end the trains half an hour before the theatre show ends. So at the end of the day, that's what we need to... That smart things like that at a local government level can certainly go a long way to creating the opportunity for hospitality to thrive. Sorry, Daniel, I ranted. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. I'd like to come to some audience questions now. So where's my microphone? Right, there's a gentleman at the back there. Go from... Okay. The microphone. Oh, there we go.
It's you.
Hi. I grew up in a rural community. In the 20s, the brewers decided they were going to close the village pub, the only centre of the village. The local landowner said a village cannot not have a pub. He bought it. The brewer has gone long ago. The pub is still there, still flourishing, employing people, keeping the village at heart beating. 5 years ago it was going to close. The villagers literally rose up with their pitchforks, more or less, and said, we must keep the pub. They did, and it's gone from strength to strength. We must support our pubs. We must support our communities, especially if you're deep in the countryside where you haven't got a lot else. Without that, we're done for. We're absolutely done for. And I think, we need to treasure and cherish it. Otherwise, lose it, and it's gone forever. Ever, ever, ever.
Thank you. Should we have another question first, and then I'll come back to the panel? There's a gentleman at the back there.
Hello. We've heard about how the hospitality industry can bring people together, and I was, with anyone else, was at the Overseas Territories reception last night. You can see that the Overseas Territories are not very well known about, part of the wider British family. Is there any way, do you think, that we can use hospitality, possibly in places like the Falkland Islands, to encourage people to meet people there, engage with this wider British family of dependent territories?
Okay. Emma, I'd like to come to you on what the first gentleman was talking about and the power of pubs to bring communities together, particularly in rural communities where there's not really much else to do or anywhere else to go. And the sort of the power of that in perhaps like the levelling up programme and agenda that the government is trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And I could have put better myself about just how unique the Great British Pub is and what it means to us. It's part of our culture, and the fabric of our society is held together by these extremely unique and special places that are really at risk. And there is a community fund that helps support communities buy and support those pubs. But I would say, look at the business model and the environment that we can create the right situation that that business that's in there doesn't fail in the first place, so we can keep those businesses in those pubs, because when they close, it is really, really hard to resuscitate them. So we desperately need to look at keeping those businesses open, the environment in which they work in. And I have to say, pre-pandemic, there was a huge burden on the British pub sector and the brewing sector, and pandemic has added to that. So now we don't need to just address the pandemic's impact, it is also redressing that burden that was there pre-pandemic. And that is something that we need to do. But I fundamentally believe that we should. And for very similar reasons, it's part of our culture, and we should be absolutely talking that up. And our overseas territories as well. I believe there's a brewery in the Falklands, if I'm not correct. There you go. So there we are. So there you are. We should absolutely be championing it around the world. And I want to see British beer in all of our UK embassies and everywhere around the world. We're part of global Britain, and we should be at the forefront of selling our culture and our great reputation.
Jonathan, yeah, I'd like to come to that sort of second point really about, selling Britain, and particularly as we're coming out of, COVID and doing more international trade. How are we going to sell Britain to the world? Is it through hospitality?
Well, I will cheekily go to the rural one quickly first.
Yeah,
Because
of course,
I grew up in a village of Alderminster, which literally had a village hall, a church, and a fantastic pub. And which was, I hated the countryside, I'll be honest with you. Like, I didn't enjoy living in it. My brother's obsessed with it. He wants to be on his own for about 5 mile radius, but then he wants to be able to get to a pub, have a drink, and then get home. That's his life. Fair play to him. But I obviously, overseas territory-wise, selling Britain is absolutely essential. Look, people voted Brexit for a multitude of reasons. But one of them was the whole global Britain vision was that we actually believe in what this country sells, and having that British stamp on so many products is a massive incentive for across the United Kingdom. And you are right, I know it's fashionable these days from the woke left to attack our heritage and to attack our, the fact that we had an empire and the fact that we had a Commonwealth that's, I think, hugely successful. We should be proud of the Commonwealth. We should be proud of the fact that we spread education and transportation around the world. And we should also be proud that we are selling the best of British within that as well. And absolutely, I don't want to just see us, selling. I won't go down the pork route because I've seen where that ends up as a GIF. But I will support fully the idea of selling more tableware, ceramic tableware into America. We should be absolutely selling more British beer into pubs, whether that be in the Commonwealth to start with, and then celebrate that heritage. And absolutely, then I think the rest of the world will see what it is that we uniquely offer. I know that this idea of a pint of ale is so obscure to the rest of the world, and they think we're drinking, warm piss, to be quite frank, but we're not. We're drinking a fantastic pint at the end of the day that's brewed a certain way, and absolutely is the heartbeat of this community. And brewers up and down the country, and I see, like I say, the ones at Titanic, Keith and Dave, these were guys 30 years ago in the making, just went out on their own, worked really hard. They're in Burslem, which has sadly become a ghost town, but they are still a fixture. They're employing local people. They've created a fantastic product that's made them one of the leading British brewers in the United Kingdom. And absolutely, if we're going to celebrate the very best of our country, it's about exporting to the rest of the world. And I think the fact we had Liz, obviously, has now gone to the Foreign Commonwealth Office. Look, there's no one more passionate about selling abroad than Liz. And now Anne-Marie Trevelyan's coming. I have absolutely full-hearted confidence behind her because she understands, and she, believe me, I can hold a drink much better than I can. So she's been on the many Armed Forces parliamentary scheme, and she knows how to get a pint down her. So she'll be absolutely brilliant. And we have no problem at all that we will then be selling the best of British around the world. But you are right. Let's use the best of the Commonwealth. Let's use our overseas territories. Let's get their products into this country as well. And let's celebrate what they're doing. We should be proud to have the Falklands as part of our United Kingdom. We should be proud to defend it. God bless Maggie. And I'm delighted to hear Charlie, I'm coming to that pub, by the way, to celebrate there. Because Because if by doing that, we make our United Kingdom stronger, we make our Commonwealth stronger, and then that will send a very clear signal to the world. The United Kingdom is back on the world and global stage.
Yeah.
Charlie, would you be willing to have some Falklands brewed beer in Maggie's?
Yeah, I'll taste it first. But yeah, no, I think it's, I completely resonate with how much we need to protect the pub. And I've got a brother who lives in the States, and the first thing he does when he comes back is go to the pub, and he just, that's the thing he misses. As I said earlier, yeah, it's way more than a business. It's a community hub. And, we can't take it for granted. And I think that's the thing about this pandemic. I think it's made people realise we can't take hospitality for granted. Not just the contribution we make to the economy, but the way we bring people together. I think suddenly you saw from April onwards, the economy was recovering, and I was like, yes, no shit, Sherlock. We're opening hospitality. That's why. And and I think through the amazing work that Emma and Kate and everyone has done beating the drum, I think you've realised we're never going to take the pub and hospitality for granted again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm probably fortunate because I grew up in a northeast rural mining village, and we had 7 pubs in the 1 mile of the front street, so we didn't have a single pub. You can see, as Charlie's right, I mean, it's the economic importance. All of the GDP growth was driven by the hospitality sector reopening over the course of the summer. But they are literally the light and life of our high streets, our town centres, our communities. When you shut our doors, you turned off the lights. Walking through central London and going past some of Charlie's brilliant bars in central London, it was devastating because you felt less safe. It was dark, it was gloomy, you had no sense of community that was going on there. And also our brilliant pubs pivoted, and I think we ought to pay tribute to the fact that they pivoted to help their communities throughout the COVID crisis. Absolutely. We had pubs that were unable to trade, that were hemorrhaging cash, that were still funding and paying for food for our NHS. They were feeding our children. They were supporting their supply chain by doing retail. They did Meals on Wheels. They did a fantastic job, and I think we just need to recognise that. Absolutely. And then on the global stage piece, presenting Britain on the global stage is all about capitalising on our soft power, our cultural power. And if you talk people abroad, yes, they mention James Bond, yes, they mention Buckingham Palace, but the top thing that they want to do, they want to eat out in Britain because we have the best cuisine in the world, and we have some fantastic pubs, bars and restaurants. And the third thing they want to do is to go and have a pint, notwithstanding what you said about it. They want to go and have a pint in a British pub. It is a tourist attraction in its own right. And I go back to my point, it's the 3rd largest export earner that we have in this UK, and it is a literal shop window when it goes to taking out the products to the rest of the world. Our pubs are what gives us that social capital.
Okay, some more questions from the audience. I think we've got one over here.
Thank you very much. Real ale is unique to British pubs, as British pubs are unique to real ale. You can't get real ale in a supermarket or corner shop. In the room now, we're drinking non-English and Welsh wine, we're drinking Italian beer and Danish beer. So whenever any of you go anywhere to organise an event, I challenge you to hold it in a British pub. I challenge the organisers of this conference to insist the hotel and the conference centre have British beer. When you're organising an I don't mind drinking Italian beer, I don't mind drinking French wine, but I prefer to drink British beer in a British pub.
Don't be so polite about the French, honestly. Don't be so polite about the French.
And also the other thing that we get when we have, and Jonathan was right about that differential beer duty and incentivising people to drink in a pub, it is a responsible supervised consumption. It's a responsible environment to drink in. We keep our customers safe. We lose our livelihoods if we don't, and you don't have that outside of that. But we will do our best to make sure that we will get British beer into events like this going forward.
Absolutely.
Should we have another question from the audience? There's a lady at the front here.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of talk about Wetherspoons and basically any other large pub chain. And obviously they provide a very cheap alternative to Brits who are operating on a budget. As a student myself, Wetherspoons is an amazing cheap alternative if you just want a cheap night out. But I think many local pub owners independent pub owners have seen a Wetherspoons open their local area, and that's probably been the final nail in the coffin for their business. And we shouldn't bash Tim Martin too much. It's a homegrown British business, and he's a massive supporter of this government and Brexit, obviously. But how do you think pubs should be striving to adapt to compete with Wetherspoons, maybe at the detriment of quality? Do you think pubs can adapt with Wetherspoons? Or do you think in the long term, as these big chains like Wetherspoons and other massive pub chains just keep on growing and growing and growing, eventually that is just going to completely kill off the independent pub trade?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think that also feeds in nicely to the question before, because I do believe that Wetherspoons had a sort of drive to bring in more British wine and British beer as well. So I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on both those. Jonathan seems very keen.
Yeah, no, because it was. I found this personally that the panelists might say something different. I can only go off what I've spoken to the industry. When the George Hotel in Burslem closed, the first thing I thought was, oh, this would be the perfect location for a Wetherspoons. There's one in the town. Burslem's the second largest nighttime economy within the city of Stoke. That could benefit. The problem was with that one was that actually the mileage, they had one in Hanley, it's about 1.5 miles from that one. They said that would draw trade away. So they wasn't no to wanting it, it was just the sadly location was too close to existing ones. But the fantastic thing I found when I spoke to other publicans in the areas, they didn't fear Wetherspoons actually. They saw Wetherspoons as something that would help potentially bring more people to the area. They feel very confident in what they offer. They know Wetherspoons has a certain brand, a certain feel, a certain style. They're confident they will attract a different audience, or Wetherspoons is the gateway to them, essentially. So they felt actually, didn't see it as a threat. They saw Wetherspoons as a benefit. And actually, in Birmingham Northfield, there was this constituency. I applied there to be a parliamentary candidate, got rejected. So that's why Stoke North sadly stuck with me. But what happened there was they took over this Tudor building that had a massive fire. It was a staple to the community. And what happened, Wetherspoons came in and said, we'll buy it, we'll invest in it. And after £4 million later, that building is back as still a Grade 2 star listed building, but in a beautiful state, and is obviously now serving great British beer in it, which obviously shows that they do invest quite heavily into local communities. And you are right, and I know you weren't bashing. I'm just saying I think that pubs personally feel that they could be, they're not a hindrance, they're actually something to work side, but again, they're confident in the product they sell and the clientele they'll bring in. And in terms of British Beer Conference, yes, I was looking for a pint of beer at the back, and I saw the Peroni, whatever it is, in the ice bucket, and I was appalled, so I didn't wave or ask for one to be passed to me. You are right. I turned over a plate yesterday at dinner in the conference zone. It was from the United Arab Emirates. Now I'm from Stoke-on-Trent, so you can imagine I nearly threw the plate on the floor out to discuss. And you are right, that if we are going to have conference, we're celebrating the Conservative Unionist Party, then that means we should be eating British food off British tableware, drinking British beer and drinking British wine at the end of the day at this party conference.
Emma, what are your thoughts on those questions?
Well, listen, we got this a lot, actually. The big guys will be okay, the chains will be all right, but actually look at some of the profit releases that they've had. They were as impacted as some other players as well, but we're all part of an ecosystem, and there needs to be different people supplying and providing for different consumer demand, and maybe somebody who's wanting to drink in a Wetherspoons may not be drinking in one of Charlie's spaces. But we need to have that variety, but we are all part of the same ecosystem. I will say for Wetherspoons, they sometimes go into towns and places and resuscitate old buildings. So they'll go in and take a building that's been empty and turn it into a pub and bring that high street back to life. So they do an awful lot of resuscitation, and they do a lot of celebration of great British beer. They're very, very hard negotiators, and Tim won't mind me saying that because he'll take great pride in doing so as well. But we need every part of that ecosystem to support the great British pub, so that the big guys also employ lots and lots of people in this country, but we need the small guys in those rural villages to provide that local economy and those local jobs at the same time. So we need to have both.
Charlie, Emma mentioned there about Wetherspoons has made a loss, and perhaps people are moving towards having smaller nights out, but more high-end quality-wise. Is that something that you're seeing in your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think competition's healthy. I'm lucky I'm living in London, though, where you don't have to worry there are enough people to go around. I think if you're in a small rural community and another pub turns up suddenly, that's probably slightly different. But I think if you're constantly looking over your shoulder, you're not looking forward. And actually, competition makes you better, and you just got to make, it's business. You've got to make yourself the better alternative. But yeah, look, my business is at a different price point to Wetherspoons. We are finding people are are probably trading up a bit. They're going out less often. They're being more considered when they do it. People are moving slightly more from, to beer to cocktails. It was funny when we first opened, they'd all been making cocktails at home and they didn't believe we're putting any alcohol in them because they got so trigger happy with their pouring. But yeah, it's interesting. I definitely think we're having to raise our game. We're constantly having to raise our game, and people have got used to restaurant quality food. On their sofas. Warner Brothers releasing films straight to streaming services. You can buy a surround sound and a cinema quality system at home. So we're having to give people a reason to leave their sofa and to come into one of our venues. And as I said earlier, going back to the key, hospitality. Hospitality can't be delivered on the back of a scooter. Service can. And we need to offer something people can't have in their sitting room. And that's how we draw people back to the pub. And that's fundamental. And to offer that, we need the people and we need the staff. And that is our biggest challenge at the moment. If you gave me a full team of staff tomorrow, I could increase our turnover by 30% overnight. We've got the demand for that right now. I'd be generating millions more as a business each year in VAT, income tax, all the different corporation tax. And we want to employ British people. They are not applying for the jobs at the moment. It's going to take a generation to change that. I'm having dinner with Nadim Sahawi tonight, and I'm going to be pressing him about how we can fundamentally change our education system to show that hospitality is a great career choice. But that's going to take time. Yeah. So we need to fill that hole right now. And that's the real worry, because that's the big handbrake on our sector right now. We've got the demand, we can't fulfill it, and that's the most frustrating thing.
And Kate, do you want to come in on those 2 points?
Yeah, look, the guys have said it all really about the Wetherspoons point. We do need that ecosystem. Just to put it in context, you've got about 40,000 pubs in the UK, and only 10 or 11,000 are those big managed chains. So they are a small part of the market. They are high profile because they are big premises in towns and city centres, but your independents are thriving, and the independent sector is dynamic and vibrant and innovative and can pivot much more quickly than a large chain, so they can be much more responsive. And Emma's right, the losses that they are reporting, they are the big losses that these businesses are sustaining. So they haven't been able to weather the storm any better than a small independent. Just picking up on Charlie's point there about the labour, this is across the board. This is pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, across the board. Over the course of the summer, we have operated at 20 to 30% less than we could have delivered because we haven't got the labour to fulfil it. So a quarter of all businesses said they closed at least one day a week over the summer since we reopened on the 19th of July, simply because they don't have sufficient labour to meet that. And it's not a skills shortage, it's a labour shortage. So we do have challenges that we need to be able to address, and we are trying to address that ourselves and putting in place the mechanisms we need. But we do have a 2-year talent pipeline shortage, because as soon as you shut our doors, you shut off all of our vocational training, all of our apprenticeships, all of our investment in our young people. We couldn't do, because you can't train people if you're closed. So we have got this hiatus to get over for the next 2 years before we can get back up to full strength. But it will inhibit our ability to recover quickly, for the economy to recover as quickly as it can do, unless we can address the issue of labour shortages in the UK, both in our own sector, where it's 10%, and in our supply chain.
Okay, I'm going to end very quickly on a quickfire round for the panel. If there was one policy that you think would help the hospitality sector, what would it, that you could implement tomorrow, what would it be? I'll start with Kate on the end.
Retaining the 12.5% VAT cut, and tell us now that it's going to be locked in, because that will give the businesses the certainty, it will give them the headroom to be able to navigate all those turbulent times that we've got. We wouldn't be sort of worried too much about the labour shortages, the supply shortages, the fuel shortages, the driver shortages, if we had the headroom. VAT is allowing us to navigate that at the moment, and if we have it put up to 20%, we will have to pass that directly on to our customers. We simply don't have the management bandwidth or the margin to be able to absorb that increase in tax. So if you put taxes up in March, we will have to pass that straight on to consumers, and that will have a direct inflationary effect, and it will increase the cost of living. So we need to lock in that low rate of VAT now. There's only 2 countries that don't have, in the EU, that don't have a low rate of VAT, Denmark and Slovakia, and we don't want to join them.
Jonathan?
Kate's terrified me now with this comrades spending review. In the interest of not repeating, others, I'm differential rate on beer duty. At the end of the day, if we make it cheaper for the pint to be pulled in the pub over the bottle sold in the supermarket, that benefits the pub industry, it benefits the brewer, it benefits the public, because ultimately they're coming into the pub as well, where it's a safer, more controlled environment, and I think that is a win for everyone overall.
Emma?
This is brilliant for me because I get to say, Kate's already said VAT, I support that. Jonathan's gone on about beer duty, which I support, so I can go on about business rates. And we need to see that happen for pubs, because the reality is we pay 5 times versus our turnover disproportionately in business rates as a Great British Pub. And that needs to come to an end. We cannot survive. We are trading 10 to 15% down. Now we've got the labour shortage, we've got CO2 shortage, we've got all these other crises, the pandemic and the winter ahead of us. We need that support now, and we need it announced sooner rather than later.
And Charlie?
I'll take all three, but VAT crucially needs to apply to alcohol too. It's no use to us, the fact that people can buy burgers more cheaply when we're not selling them. That is fundamental. It's really, really disproportionately targeted help to food-led operations, and it's not helping bars who've suffered the most.
Charlie, on that one, can I just come back? Because it's fascinating you've said this, because I agree with you, by the way, on this. And the issue is, I think there's a very well-slicked machined health lobby lobbying on behalf of, if you bring that down on beer, suddenly everyone's going to become even fatter, everyone's going to become an alcoholic overnight, blah, blah. And I think that's the challenge the industry can help me as an MP, if I'm honest, is how do we take on the health lobby? You're going to say, if we do this on alcohol, we're opening up Pandora's box on other issues, which the state's going to pick up the tab on, other things. And that's all I can say.
I would point them to the direction of the supermarket, where they could be buying things for 1/10 of the price, and actually will just encourage people there. So, and also, if I'm honest, most retailers aren't going to be able to afford to pass that on directly to the consumer. The VAT really cut has been there to help the businesses. And I think that's what it was intended for, and that's how businesses have used it.
Well, before I let you go to enjoy the hospitality that Manchester has to offer, which has been fantastic, I'm sure you've all been enjoying it, this conference. If you could pop all your glasses and your beer bottles at the back of the room as you leave. And if you're interested in our next event, then please form a separate queue outside. There's already one forming at the back there. Thank you very much to our panellists. If you could all give them a round of applause.